Silver Lake. Welcome to the Milford Township Municipal Building and the monthly Planning Commission meeting. This time I call the meeting of March 1st, 2022 to order. All please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. If you haven't signed the attendance sheet back there, please do for the record. Next, I want to introduce the Planning Commission and our support staff. Starting on my left here in the front row here is Doug Prozan. Next to him is Pete Cabea. On my far right, Denise Pizarro, recording secretary. Next to her, Linda McCabe and Tony Sitter. In the rear on my left is Jennifer Herniason, the Township Council. Next to her is Matt Waldinger, the Director of Planning and Development. And on my right in the rear is Julie Maggio, the Assistant Zoning and Development Officer, and Matt Puzz, the Zoning and Development Officer. And in the audience, we have our Township Solicitor, and Mark Shaw and his cohort, Lydia Caparosa, Assistant Township Council. Before we begin, I'll call for a motion to accept the minutes of the last month's meeting as written.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I didn't think so. Milford Planning Commission is a recommending body that hears testimony, asks and answers questions, deliberates, passes our recommendations on to the Milford Township supervisors who make the final decisions. Subdivision and or land development discussed tonight, if acted on by the Planning Commission, will be considered by the Township supervisors at their regular meeting to be held on Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. in the Township Assembly Room, this room here. The first item on the agenda tonight is for Phillips Edison and Company. I better put these things on so I can, in case I have to read any big numbers here. It's a small subdivision plan to show the replot of 2519 West 12th Street to create a 1.063 acre lot and a residual lot of 13.485 acres, Yorktown Plaza, along the south line of West 12th Street, west of Pittsburgh Avenue and Tract 14. Sir, please come to the podium, give us your name and address.
Sure. Justin Thornton. I'm with Colliers Engineering Design. And my address, and you have to forgive me, I just moved there, so I have to look it up still. It's 1501 Reedsdale Street, Suite 302 in Pittsburgh, PA.
Okay. Excuse me. Anybody have, you wanted to say anything about it or not?
I can if you'd like. I mean, I noticed you already have a copy of the location, so I don't need to pull my own exhibit up here, but essentially it's the Yorktown Center Shopping Center is where the Chick-fil-A is located. And it's a relatively simple application. The applicant or the property owner would like to subdivide out and create a separate parcel out of the Chick-fil-A lot. Mostly for leasing and tax purposes for themselves. And that's essentially what they're doing. We're not creating any new variances as part of it. It's just essentially a line on a paper. It'll still act as a shopping center there. Cross access will be provided. Cross parking will be provided.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for him?
Question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, the other item on the agenda
Mr.
for
Chairman?
tonight. Oh, I'm sorry. Anyone else have anything? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the HNJIB, I guess, A land development plan to show the construction of a 9,690 square foot restaurant with a proposed deck and patio with associated parking and stormwater management facilities at 3531 Westlake Road along the south line of Westlake Road east of Linden Avenue and tract number 9.
Good evening, I'm Laura Gunchin with Erie Management Group. Address is 1540 East Lake Road, Suite 300, Erie 16511. For those of you who have not met, again, Laura Gunchin, I'm the Vice President, Project Management Office at Erie Management Group. It's actually Onjib, which is Korean for On's House. We were in front of you not that long ago for a rezoning, if you remember that. 3531 Westlake Road is the former Alto Cucina restaurant and is zoned C2 general commercial across most of the property and R1 in the rear. In late 2020, we consolidated the two former tax parcels by deed, and just last month, we further consolidated by deed 713 Linden Avenue into 3531 after purchasing it in 2021. All structures at 3531 need to be demolished in the near future to make way for the new construction. Their current condition, unfortunately, is beyond any meaningful repair. Apologize if that was me. I don't think it was. A compliant stormwater management plan has been submitted to the township engineer and review is underway. Much like its predecessors, Onjib is a unique fine dining experience. The footprint of the restaurant, as the chairman mentioned, is about 9,600 square feet of both indoor and outdoor seating. Having access to covered outdoor seating is important, as we all know, in a post-pandemic world. That size footprint calls for about 298 seats and a corresponding 109 total parking spaces. You'll see 92 spots shown on the drawing with 17 land banked. We do not anticipate immediately needing those 17 spots, but of course the stormwater management system has been appropriately sized to currently account for those 17 spots. As you can also see on the plan, all pedestrian facilities are ADA compliant. Regarding planting and screenings, the plan does include screening with fencing as well as plantings as required. At the 4 end cap locations, the proposed underground stormwater management system prevents trees from being planted there. The LDP does provide the correct number of trees. We've simply moved them to outside of the stormwater management system footprint. It is understood that access to Westlake Road is authorized only by an approved highway occupancy permit. The 2 driveway points are existing and the plan does show that they're reuse. Onjib is a multi-million-dollar project and is slated to get started in the coming weeks. We're very excited to be bringing a storied property back to useful life. May I assist you with any questions?
Okay, what did you say about driveways or entrances?
There are 2 existing entrances, one off Westlake Road and
One on
one
Westlake,
off of Linden.
And one on Linden?
Yep, and those
Okay.
will be reused.
All right. I see that one now. Okay, anybody have any questions or comments? Okay. Anyone else care to speak at this? Come up here, please, and give us your name and address for the record. And
Dustin Thornton, I live on 825 Linden. Sorry. I have a loud voice, I feel like I do that. All right, sorry, I'm Dustin Thornton, I live on 825 Linden, and I was just concerned with how it was gonna affect Linden Avenue. That's a really quiet street, very little traffic, lots of families, young children, pets. And the driveway that's on Linden Avenue has never been used in the past. I've been around the property for my entire 40 years of life. And when it was the Aviation Club, when it was Alto Cucina, that was always a private entrance on Linden Avenue, wasn't used. And actually, since they've taken over, it's been gated. And we're concerned about how that's gonna affect Linden. If we have an actual used entrance there, and during dinner hours, you're gonna have a highway coming up and down a tiny little side street. And just curious how that's all planned, as well as we're also curious about what they're doing with the wooded lot that's behind the property, because there doesn't seem to be anything in the plans about that I'm aware of when we checked into it. So just trying to see kind of what's going on, basically.
Well, it's pretty tough to tell what the traffic is gonna be like, you know? Really.
Oh, I mean, I actually have a degree in restaurant management, so I know with restaurants, you've got a, 50% of failure, chance of failure in the first 5 years, so. Yeah, there may not be any traffic, it may quiet the street down a little bit, but, I don't think that they're gonna, spend that kind of money for, without a really good plan in place, and it's just,
Could she come up and address that?
Yes.
basically, we're just trying to understand what's going on, not so much trying to process,
No,
just,
I understand. Legitimate question.
Is there a traffic light at Linden
In
Avenue?
my understanding, Mr. Waldinger,
Is there
Mr.
a
Busk can
traffic
answer
light in
this, is
Linden?
that secondary location was for emergency purposes, that it's required to have an additional discharge there?
I don't know that,
Because traffic is one way off of, the plan is for traffic to be one way off of Westlake Road?
well, then definitely you would need an additional exit. And it is an existing current exit, so you do have permission or, permitted to use that.
I think it's an ingress only though, isn't it?
Off of Westlake.
Huh?
Off of Westlake.
I don't think so.
It's just, is it ingress and egress off of Westlake Road or just
It
ingress?
is ingress.
Just ingress,
Yeah, it has one-way signs on it currently.
okay.
And then to your second point about the green space in the back, that's actually zoned R1 residential, and we don't have any plans to.
So
We'd be very limited in what we could do with it anyway, because of the zoning, we don't have any plans to change it.
This is more of a personal question, I don't know if that's really the time, if they're interested in selling any of that property. We own the last lot, it's, the property is right connected to our house. It's
Okay.
actually, in the plans, it's a right of way of yours,
Okay,
and of course, we'd like to preserve our yard and
Sure.
prevent, future.
I can give you my contact information before I go. Anything else?
I do have one question regarding the access off of Westlake Road.
Sure.
Do you have any desire to make it a two-way access? Are you going to request that from PennDOT, or are you?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Unless there's a compelling argument to do so, we'd have to widen it probably significantly, and it's already up against the property line, against the east neighbors.
And any of that obviously would require PennDOT's approval with Westlake Roads. Okay, just wasn't sure if an application had been submitted to make any changes or not.
Is that actually an ingress only layout? Or
That
does
would-
it matter?
I mean, that would completely have to do with what their highway occupancy permit from PennDOT says. So, yeah, they'd have to abide by that.
Okay. And we don't know what it is currently.
I do not, no.
Do you know what it is?
I do not formally, I do know that there are one-way signs there,
Okay,
and then it doesn't appear to be wide enough to be two forms.
for two ways.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, does that satisfy you, sir?
Yeah, that was kind of what I wanted to know, and it actually is, that is the concern, that it's a one-way leading onto Linden Avenue onto a small street, that's, the driveway going in is a narrow curved driveway. Historically, it's always been one-way, regardless of what business was there. I wanna say that Alta Cucina's didn't operate by that. I mean, I don't know, that it was right, but I mean, I don't think, well, when that restaurant was in the 50% of restaurants that failed the first 5 years. And they, as far as I can tell, never had business there. So basically, as the aviation club, it was a very private, exclusive club. There wasn't a lot of traffic coming in and out, and then it was a restaurant that didn't do well. So it never really had any bearing on anything. But we are concerned. You've got big companies behind you, and it's, you're not the type of companies that fail. You know what I mean? So we're worried not so much just about this. We're worried about what future developments may follow. And, I don't know, I've been looking up at the plans to consider entrances and exits, but there's a lot of street front on Westlake Road. So I don't know if it's, related to the construction of the building or related to the, drain water or anything like that. I mean, I know there is plenty of space that can all be on 8th Street if that, the plan or 6th Street.
Well, if we do, to your question, if we do add more impervious, then clearly that does impact the stormwater management plan. And utilizing existing egress is surely easier. Most of the time, it's typically better.
And
Right,
it is
and-
comforting that that other lot is zone residential.
Yes.
Because that is our biggest thing. Because when we were building a new 10,000 foot, building, like, as far as we know, they could be building that in our backyard, and
Yeah.
the other whole rest would be a parking lot. And that's like, of course, we don't want that. It's a very, it's not really much, as far as like Washington was, or Asbury Woods or something. Space left in Millbury.
Right.
And it's like that lot has deer and all kinds of makes us, city folks feel a little bit more like we're in the country having that in the backyard, and I know, being all the other neighbors enjoy having it there, so.
And part of keeping the existing ingress and egress is so that we can keep the green space in the front also. So you've got that big front yard that does have the deck next to it, and that is to have a similar feel to it currently. Keep the trees.
There's no guarantee, but normally I would say something like this would enhance your neighborhood.
Right, I mean, possibly enhance property values, I wouldn't
Right.
say enhance the.
Most of
There's
these,
a difference, I mean, yeah.
well,
that's-
both, I think in this case it would be both.
Well, I mean, more traffic on the street where kids are playing in the street is never an advantage.
Well,
It is if you're in a,
I-
big
It's
neighborhood.
not that big a restaurant that the traffic would be that much of a problem for you compared to what it's always been.
Right. That's, I mean, I don't know if you realize how quiet the street is now.
Yeah, I drive that probably several times a week.
We'd be
A
happy
lot
to,
of you.
we'd be happy to work with the township with a slow kids playing sign as appropriate. Can let the record reflect that, we'd be happy to pay for that.
Another thing that could even help is all traffic lights for right side.
That's
I
behind.
don't know if that's, I mean, I don't know anything about traffic law or anything like that, but I mean, it is, yeah, the exit is right near Sixth Street, so it doesn't have all that traffic, going both directions, but could create another problem having everybody up and kind of go down, so.
I don't think I like
Thank you.
that driveway thing like that.
Which one? It's always been that way.
I know. Okay, anyone else have anything to say? Okay, we're gonna make a decision or a recommendation for these two items. And then we'll move on to other things. What do I do with my? There's, I got it all marked up. Okay.
Are we gonna vote on these two?
Yes, so we're gonna do that. Okay, the first item was Phillips Edison Company, the small subdivision plan, show the replot of 2519 West 12th Street to create a 1.063 acre lot and a residual lot of 13.485 acres, Yorktown Plaza, along the south line of West 12th Street, west of Pittsburgh Avenue and Tract 14. Someone want to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Okay, any questions or comments or anything on it? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. And the other one is the one we just discussed here, AHN, is that JIB? Is that? Anju, is that what that, is that how you? Okay. A land development plan to show the construction of a 9,690 square foot restaurant with a proposed deck and patio of associated parking and stormwater management facilities at 3531 Westlake Road along the south line of Westlake Road, east of Linden Avenue and tract number 9.
I move that we recommend approval.
Okay, second? Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. Thank you, folks, for that. Okay, the next item on our agenda for tonight is the review of the township zoning ordinance. I'll turn this over to, didn't you say you wanted to say something here?
I did, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Please, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to give a brief summary of the changes that have been made in the most current version of the draft zoning code. These are changes reflected since your previous meetings, all the input that we've taken, as well as input based on a December 8th special meeting that the supervisors held to take input on the zoning code. So really quickly, just to give you a quick summary of the changes that have been made. In the definitions section, we added some definitions relative to electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging stations. We added definitions dealing with agricultural activities in the conservation residential district. Items such as the definition of a farm, livestock, non-commercial keeping of chickens and ducks were added. We did add a definition of the Presque Isle corridor That is a set area along West 8th Street and on Peninsula from 6th to 8th and 300 feet of 8th Street, where the Build 2 lines would apply. The Build 2 lines no longer apply to the entirety of the Presque Isle Gateway District. As far as changes to the ordinance itself, I think the most major change, everyone would agree, was the fact that we consolidated the mixed-use 2 and the mixed-use 3 district into a new mixed-use 2 district that contains all of the uses of the 2 separate districts combined. Retail is now a permitted use in this mixed-use 2 district, and we have retained the mixed-use 1 district as a smaller-scale neighborhood-focused mixed-use area. We did update lighting standards based on technical comments we received, and we have removed the height limit on lighting poles in the commercial districts. Convenience stores were updated with regulations to reflect the standards in the Pennsylvania Flammable Liquids Act. The limited lodging standards have been modified. We've removed the upper limit of days in the long-term category. We've also limited occupancy to 2 persons per bedroom, and we now require smoke detectors and fire alarms in homes used as limited lodging. The language that was meant to encourage gas canopies being built behind buildings has been removed. We now have a hard setback of 50 feet from the right-of-way for any fuel island. Canopies can overhang beyond that, but the fuel islands themselves are where the setback is counted. We've clarified regulations related to billboards based on comments and industry standards, and we have removed the limit to parking permitted in front of structures. If you remember previously, we had some limits to how much could be parked in front of the structure, and the rest had to be in the rear and the sides. We've changed this to a pure incentive method meant to encourage parking in the rear or the sides, but there's no limit to parking in the front. So that's a summary of the major changes that we've made since the last draft that you've seen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Coming up here?
At this time now.
Okay. I'm sure there are people here that want to speak. Let's take it one at a time here.
Good evening. My name is Greg Baldwin with Baldwin Brothers. I'm sure you're not surprised to see me here today. 2540 Village Common Drive, Erie, PA 16506. So we have some written comments. I will say that the township, the administration, everyone has worked really hard on this ordinance, has taken a lot of public comment, so we appreciate it. It gets old at some point, so we appreciate your continued efforts to review our comments and talk with us. So much appreciated, but I've emailed these to you guys as well. So we have significant comments that remain, fairly significant, but generally the comments that we're providing tonight are really based kind of in 2 areas. One is the Presque Isle District itself, the creation of the Presque Isle Corridor, and secondly, it's really some additional permitted uses that we really think are important in some of the zoning districts. So the specific permitted uses are within our comments. We address each district independently, so it's pretty simple to understand that. But with respect to the Presque Isle District, the Build 2 requirement, we continue to try to explain to everyone that this is going to truly inhibit development and redevelopment in the district. It really is. I mean, we're talking about forcing people to build 10 feet off of the right-of-way. And even though the Presque Isle Corridor was created, so we're beginning to limit the area of the Build 2, the other areas require parking behind the buildings. So in essence, you have a whole Presque Isle district that you're gonna have buildings up close to the road, parking behind. So what's gonna happen in the end? For example, I can tell you, the Joe Roots that we bought recently, I promise you it's gonna look exactly the same as it does. We have absolutely no incentive to attempt to redevelop the site because all the parking is going to be behind the building. We're gonna have to put significant dollars into the site. We're gonna have to build that building on the street, literally, and it's no incentive whatsoever for anybody in that entire district to do anything. So the question I think the Planning Commission has to ask themselves as you are beginning to review the draft and the modifications that have been made most recently is whether or not you want to see the district look exactly as it is today without any further redevelopment, development, or new investment into the market, other than maybe the Gateway District plan with some landscaping, because that's what's going to happen, or do we want to really incentivize redevelopment, development, and investment in that area to create a gateway district that we actually think is really important and would be fabulous? We are 100% for new landscaping and changing the traffic pattern and really making it a more walkable area where people want to go. We're 100% for that. But when it comes to the development of the buildings, you are absolutely not going to see any changes in that little district. So really, the Planning Commission should think about that. We're talking to the supervisors as well, because they need to think about that too, and really consider whether or not we're going to make this change. So it's so significant that it's almost incomprehensible that a municipality would do this. So our comments are in the letters. I don't want to take any more of your time, but I think it's really important that you really understand the issues around that. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions or anything for him? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time.
Sir?
Hi, my name's Michael Peck. Our office is on West 12th Street. First of all, I'd like to commend the township for the changes that they've made so far. They've listened, they've adapted. I know Mark's put a ton of work into this thing. We've reviewed it intensively, and we're, for the most part, saying there's a lot of good things. I'm not involved in the Presque Isle district like Gregory is, so I can't comment on that. I'm just not that aware of it. But when the changes that you made at MU1, MU2, and MU3 were generally saying we're on the right track here. There's one significant part, though, that I think needs to be taken into account. And I think I've been explained the history of it by Matt Puzz and Matt Waldinger. And that goes into where I'm looking at it from is the evolution of where the electrical vehicle charging station situation is going to be. And fortunately, unfortunately, I'm a little close to it because I have a relative who's head of development for a very large company in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. They do these things. And obviously, as you all know, the country is going to electric cars, okay? When's it gonna happen? It's obviously gonna happen over the next 25 or 30 years. And the big issue is gonna be where you're gonna charge these things. And the way it's gonna work with a lot of the big companies, okay? And I use this word convenience store, because it's in your ordinance. It says convenience store, and I think originally everybody was saying, well, every convenience store has got a gas operation to it, and we don't want any more gas stations. Well, quite frankly, and the other commercial real estate guys could speak up to this, I don't know any gas operations that want to put any more gas stations in this area, okay? It's kind of over-gassed the way it is. But the industry is going to transform, okay, and it's going to transform into the new prototypes, which I've seen, okay, in the South, and my son's involved in California with Tesla. The new prototypes are going to have a combination, at least in the convenience store industry. There's going to be a combination of bringing those in. So the new prototypes in South Florida have some fuel and a lot of recharging, okay? And if you're in California, it's the other way. I mean, they got a lot of recharging, but there is a convenience store component to it. That's the point, okay? In other words, when you charge your electric vehicle, it takes, depending on the vehicle, time. You're gonna sit there and you're gonna say, okay, I'm charging my vehicle, what in the hell am I gonna do? And so there is a convenience component to it. There's a building that will be involved in it. And it was explained to me in detail by my relative, you know, how they're, and he's an upper-end executive with this company, where they're going with this thing. So when you put in the MU, you combined the MU2 and the MU3 into a ordinance basically for the preponderance of commercial space in Mill Creek Township. So when this changes, all right, right now, I mean, there's hardly anything in Erie regarding electric vehicles. I mean, you got something at, up at one of the hotels up there. I know we did an electric vehicle charging at the West Erie Plaza when we built that. But when these changes are made, okay, and you have the bigger companies that want to come in, there's got to be a way to do that. And like my relative in Florida, if they would come to us and say, okay, here's our prototype, we want to put it on a piece of property. I don't know of one piece of property, the way the ordinance is written, that would accommodate that. So when it says you want to have large convenience stores as a conditional use, okay, I'm saying you need to expand that definition, I think. There needs to be some wording so that you can have a convenience store that has the new prototype, okay? And the way you're done right now, you can't. And the way I would read it, if you had an existing and they wanted to revamp it or retool it to a electric charging station, it'd be a non-conforming use. So how do you have the preponderance of your commercial space in an area where you can't do an electric charging station? It doesn't work the way it's written right now. My suggestion would be, I think, I mean, I understand what the original intent was. The original intent was we don't want any more gas stations. But that's not where the world's going, okay? You know, get out of Erie, go to California, go to Florida, go to Texas. And it's just a whole different ballgame now. And the way it's written right now, you couldn't do it in Mill Creek Township. You'd have to come in and get a conditional use. And when you are dealing with, and these guys are more familiar with this than I am, Daryl and Gregory, when you're working with a big company, okay, and they come in and they say, oh, by the way, this would be a perfect site for us to do what we want to do, but oh, by the way, it's a conditional use. Forget it, they're gone. You know that, Doug. They're going to say, hey, wait, we're going to go to Cleveland and where we can do whatever the hell we want. So that was my conversation. So, if you have any questions?
Oh, sir.
No, all right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Come on. I wonder if that was taken into consideration at all.
I do not know.
I'm Daryl Torella, Passport Realty, 5050 West Ridge Road, Suite 201. I too agree that you made a lot of changes and for the good, I think. I had some questions about specific uses in some of the districts. In the C2 zoning, I would kind of suggest, in the past, C1 probably had less uses than C2. I know we're not looking in the past, we're looking in the future, but in the C1 corridor, you've got car washes and convenience stores that are available as a permitted use, but in the C2 corridor, you don't. If you look at some of the properties, of course, right now you've got a lot of convenience stores that are going to be labeled as a C2 district. They're going to be non-conforming. There's areas like, I don't know, by the mall and things like that where you've got C2 districts that aren't going to be able to have convenience stores. I think that's probably convenience stores and car washes might be something you might want to take a look at in the C2 zoning as permitted uses rather than just not having them in there at all. You go into I'm looking at some specific corridors because of my clients and the C2 up by the mall, and then you've got MU2 along 26th Street. Again, on MU2, you don't have the large convenience stores that are allowed in there or conditional use for a small convenience store. And you're talking about properties like the former Kmart shopping center. So I think that maybe that's something that should also be looked at in the MU2. Greg mentioned Greg Baldwin mentioned along the Presque Isle corridor about having the buildings on the street. I agree with him that could be an issue not only for redevelopment, but even for being realistic. You have snowplows going by. You're going to have a sidewalk between the building and the street. Where are people going to walk if you're trying to create a walking corridor? Those are pretty much most of my questions on that. I think you answered about the parking in some of these districts, that you can have it all in the front if you wanted to. So I guess I'm okay with that. One other comment I have is you have the temporary signs, which I assume that real estate signs are involved in that. And I think you have a limit of 60 days to have a temporary sign up there. Is that something that says that time limit for temporary signs is 60 days in your general requirements. So I wish everything sold in 60 days.
So you'd like to see that change too?
Yeah, I think, temporary sign, I don't know, maybe if it's a political sign or something like that, I understand it, but when you get into real estate signs and things like that, I think, obviously we're gonna have to have a little bit more time.
It's 60 days. Right.
So I think I'm not sure that it needs a time element, depending on what property it is. And you can always put in there that they have to be maintained properly and not become an eyesore. Those are my comments.
All right, thank you. Anybody have any comments or questions for him? All right. Someone else? Okay, I guess that will end that for this evening. Correct? Do you have anything to say here?
No, I do not at this time. Thank you.
Not this time.
Not at this time. Thank you.
Matt, did you guys consider the changes with electric servicing in these grocery areas? I'm not familiar with.
Electric vehicle charging?
How large of an area they actually need. Is there a layout, or is there existing layout for it? Or?
They're permitted in parking areas. You're permitted to put in electronic vehicle charging. It's an accessory use.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can place them wherever you would like.
You don't need a minimum amount of area.
Other than, there's nothing in the code. I mean, obviously you
Yeah.
probably do. You have to have at least a minimum of a parking spot,
space.
right?
Yeah.
But if they need any extra room, then it would be up to the person that's doing the developing to add that room.
So what we're saying is let's say an existing building, existing business, let's use a convenience store, that has gas pumps there in front and so on, and parking spaces around the perimeter of the property. We're saying that the charging stations would be put at a certain amount of those parking spaces. Correct?
The way the ordinance is currently written, the electronic vehicle charging stations are a permitted accessory use when there's a parking space. So hypothetically speaking, if there was 12 required parking spaces, somebody could have 12 charging stations. They'd have to be available for parking as well as charging, but they would be permitted.
But you can't regulate that. I mean,
If you regulate
Well,
it.
people pulling on charge their cars, so you also want to park is
But I think to kind of piggyback off of Matt's comment, if you're required to have 12 parking spaces, there's nothing to prohibit you other than maximums from adding 15 or 16 parking spaces. You know, and having some of them be electric only, as long as you meet the minimum requirements for what what you have to have for minimum parking.
So what they're gonna end up doing is you're gonna end up putting additional parking spaces in these newer areas.
It's possible, you
because-
can, or, yeah.
yes.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're here for. Just, yeah, what do you wanna?
The point I'm trying to make is this. You're saying if you have a new building, or if you have an existing building, are you allowed to put an electric charging station on? Okay, that was your question.
In each parking area, it's an option to put a charging station within that parking space.
And what I'm saying to you is where the industry is going and where the world is going, is they're gonna have a prototype, okay? They're not gonna take an existing, they're gonna revamp it and redesign it so it's efficient for the amount of cars that have to go through there to get charged. So they're gonna be coming to Mill Creek Township and they're gonna say, okay, fine, pick a spot, okay? We're gonna tear the building out, we're gonna build our new prototype operation here in Mill Creek Township, and here's what we're gonna do. And they're gonna tear down what they have and they're gonna build new.
Yeah, but that wouldn't prohibit somebody else using an existing one. You have both.
Well,
You
it
have
would
new ones
prohibit
over
some,
here,
it would,
and there'll be
it
a
would,
transition.
prohibit somebody from doing it in the MU2 because it'd be a non-conforming use. That's the way I read it.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
That's not how it was written and not how, Matt's the zoning
No,
officer,
I'm
so it's up
talking
to
about,
his
I'm talking about if
interpretation.
you're
but-
taking an existing building and tearing it down and
Mhm.
have a new design come in.
Yep.
Okay, and put in there, your ordinance says you can't do large convenience store. Okay, and we're saying convenience store, I'm saying this isn't gonna be necessarily a full-blown convenience store is what you see right now. It's gonna be a hybrid, okay? It's gonna have a component for convenience, okay? But it's gonna have the ability to charge lots of cars,
Mhm.
okay? So they're gonna have to build a new facility.
And they could certainly put a charging station at every one of the parking spots in that, on that new development. We're saying that's permitted as an accessory use.
The building wouldn't be permitted, because you have a limitation on the building according to your ordinance. It's a
Yeah.
conditional.
Conditional
It's a
use.
conditional use, it's exactly right.
Mhm.
In other words, you'd have to come in and say, if you wanted to do, in other words, you're defining a large convenience store because you put a square foot number on it, okay? Right?
Yes?
And what's the square foot number? I don't have the ordinance.
I think
in
it's
front.
10,000, I
Huh?
believe. 10,000 is the
And what's
maximum.
the square foot number for a small convenience store, neighborhood convenience store?
I don't recall that one off the top of my
Well,
head.
new prototypes are 7,000 square feet. That's what they are. I've seen them, I've been in them.
Mhm.
And it's a totally different animal. And the only point I'm trying to make is that if you wanted to come in and do that, you'd have to go through a lot of hoops, the way the ordinance is written right now. That's my only point, is that you're not allowing that to be a permitted use. I know we think that's a detriment, because we see that's where it's gonna go.
What you've seen
Mm-hmm.
in Florida, wherever, with these
Electric charging station.
places, is the building might have a small convenience store part to it, but is it also let's say a lounge where people can sit around and wait for their,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the point, you know, what do
Or
you?
entertainment center where they can sit and
Yeah,
watch,
they can have multiple uses inside, because when you're charging your car, you're sitting there, you have someplace to go.
okay, so the convenience part of it is not really a small grocery store type thing, or where you pick up, your chips and pop or whatever, it's
It could
more of
be.
a,
To be
Depends
determined.
on the one, but
How long does it take to charge the existing cars that are out there?
my understanding, it's around 25 minutes, but I'm not an expert, don't get me wrong, but it's not like pumping gas.
Yeah, so
Okay.
what we'd want to do is, when you get into this area, you wouldn't want to make it a non-conforming use.
But
If you're
it's-
getting, because this is all, like you're saying, this is all going to change. You might end up having these people come in and not necessarily getting milk, but actually being entertained in this complex while they're charging.
Well,
What's gonna happen is the big companies that do this, okay, they're gonna have the visions that this is what they do, okay? I mean, the one that I'm familiar with is Circle K, okay? I mean, only because of my relationship. And I see what the Circle K has done,
So you're just concerned when it goes to non-conforming use, it's going to be a hoop that most developers are going to walk past in this area.
It's
most
not a
tenants are gonna
non-conforming
walk
use.
past.
It's not.
A non-conforming use is a use that was established prior to a zoning ordinance or a change in a zoning ordinance.
It's a
Conditional use is not a non-conforming use. A conditional use is permitted, it just has to be reviewed by the planning commission and then approved by the board of supervisors. And I will state that, when you say a convenience store, are you almost like talking about like a retail store, which is a permitted use in the MU2 district now?
Well, that's the problem with the way I read it, okay?
I mean,
You say convenience store, you can't put any convenience store. How are you defining a convenience store?
that could also be a retail establishment, which is a permitted use by right.
Well, but you would call Country Fair a convenience store, for example.
That would be a convenience store, yes, but you
Okay.
could also establish a retail use.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like what your concern is that while it's charging, people need to have some sort of activity there. So a retail store would,
No, my
meet that.
concern is that let's use that as an example, okay? Let's say Country Fair. Let's say Country Fair at the corner of any corner where you have a country fair. They wanted to come in, and it's an MU2 district, because pretty much every country fair is in an MU2 district now at this point, right? Pretty close, I would think, okay? So if they come in and they say, "Hey, we want to knock our building down, and we want to put in our new prototype building, okay? Not dissimilar to what happened at the Westbury Plaza with Eaton Park and Chick-fil-A. You know, Chick-fil-A came in, it's the same use, but they wanted to do a prototype. Well, you're putting confinements on the size of these buildings that these people can use. You're saying a convenience store is a large convenience store. And my understanding was, the reason all this was done, somebody didn't want to see any more gas stations. Well, okay. I mean, I understand that, but I just don't think that's where the industry's going.
okay, I see what your point is. I'm formulating, give me one moment. When somebody comes in, so you have your country fair, which is an established use. Somebody tears it down and rebuilds it, that use has already still been established, provided that is reconstructed within 1 year, there would be no reason to go through a conditional use process.
You sure about that?
Yes.
No?
Sorry.
Well, what about somebody that has a piece of property and wants to do it?
Well, then that use has not been established, then it has to go through the conditional use process.
That's my point. Why is that? I mean, if this is where the world is going, don't you think we ought to be concerned that we're gonna be able to have places where you can actually do this? Because you couldn't do it under the existing MU2. You can't do it, Matt.
I'm
The
not
way
here to
reading it, I
debate,
mean,
I'm just here
You're
to
gonna
try
have
and
a
facilitate.
7,000 square foot building that's gonna have something in it, okay? If you do what they're doing in California and Florida, okay? You got a 7,000 square foot building with some component of gas, but a lot of component of electrical. I mean, they're not all gonna be all electrical all at the same time. It's gonna be, you know, phased in, so.
But I think, by definition, during that transition period, as long as there's fuel involved, it will be considered a convenience store. In the future, a purely, pure electronic charging station, whether it's by itself or whether it's got a store or a restaurant or something attached, then that would still be permitted. It would be an eating and drinking establishment where the
What if somebody
charging
wanted to
stations
put in
would
a
be,
convenience store that had all electric charging stations?
that by definition, that's not a convenience store because it's it's the fuel dispensers that make it a convenience store. It would be a retail shop.
That's where we got hung up with your language, okay? Fuel dispensing, are you saying that a charging station is not a fuel dispensing operation? You're saying, see that, remember, we had this discussion, you and I.
Yes.
It's defined
Mark,
separately.
You have to define that.
Defined as not included.
Huh?
Fuel dispenser in our proposed ordinance is defined as not including electric charging stations.
So you're saying fuel is petroleum?
Because we didn't want that overlap, we thought that would create confusion. So we specifically added to that definition of fuel dispenser that does not include electric charging stations.
Okay. So are you saying you could do in an MU2 district, you could do a convenience store that had electric charging stations and no fuel?
Again,
I was just say,
Well,
if they're
good
not
question.
fuel, if you don't have the petroleum fuel stations, it is not a convenience store. It would be considered a retail establishment.
that you could have electronic vehicle charging stations at. Yes.
Correct.
I mean, it could look like, operate like a convenience store, but
So
by
no,
definition, it's not.
You can have a convenience store in MU2 as long as you don't have petroleum fuel pumping.
Then it's a retail store.
It's not, it would not be classified by definition as a convenience store. Yeah,
It
you,
would just be a store.
yes, it's a store.
Okay.
I mean, that's the biggest, the biggest difference between a convenience store and retail.
But they've made that to
Build a
exclude it.
convenience store, a
They made
Kentucky
that
Fair
definition
store,
to be
anywhere
specifically
in the MU2 district,
fuel, not electric charging.
but the minute that they put in
Yeah, I don't know.
petroleum,
They would have gone the other way.
it's gotta go through a
Conditional use. Yes.
which means you're trying to control the amount of the gas pumping I mean,
Not trying to control, like Matt mentioned, conditional use is a permitted use. You just have to go through a few extra steps to get the plan approved to make sure that it fits in with the neighborhood and isn't detrimental to
Oh,
the
that's-
area around.
We get that, I get that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is permitted, it just has to go through the planning commission, the supervisors.
I have a question. Mark. Why is there a difference between a fueling station for petroleum and a charging station for that? Why do you have a difference?
I think the thought was, and that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the thought was that there really is a different animal than a fueling station. Because, a fuel dispenser has, tanks and pumps, and often, canopies and all that other stuff, whereas traditionally, at least what you're seeing today on these are.
Oh, no, charging station's absolutely gonna have a canopy.
Sure.
You're not gonna charge it in the rain.
Well, I guess I wonder why do you need to have a differentiation of the word fuel or whatever?
Why wouldn't you make it inclusive instead of
If-
X?
Well, if,
Adds more flexibility, I think.
yeah.
That was exactly our question.
Well, and if I may, I mean, and I'm going to use Mr. Peck's own example right here. When you did Westbury Plaza, there are electric vehicle charging stations in Westbury Plaza at a couple parking spaces, right? Could you imagine if they just popped a couple fuel pumps next to some parking spaces in the West Erie Plaza? You can't do it. I mean, for the reasons Mark mentioned, plus DEP regulations. So we tried to uncouple those so that electronic vehicle charging stations will proliferate and be more available to people because you can put them anywhere. If you lump the two together, then you're stuck with the rules that go around fuel dispensing as well.
It's actually better this way. It makes it easier, inclusive.
We try to simplify it, and,
Yeah.
we obviously look at your issues and see if there's tweaks we can make to make it clearer. But I think it doesn't make sense to combine those.
You must have seen some of these charging stations.
Sure.
And
where, I can tell you where
Yeah. I would think
I've been told it's going, okay? All right? Where I've been told it's going is that they're gonna be morphed in. In other words, there's gonna be a component of fuel and a component of electrical until all the car companies get to the point where all they're doing is pumping out electric vehicles, then the fuel will be phased out. And the fuel will be phased out over a period of time. It's definitely gonna get phased out. But there'll be a small component of it. So that was the reason.
I plead ignorance of anything knowing about electric vehicles. Where are the charging plug-ins located on cars? These cars,
Ones I've seen are right where you put the gas. Mhm. I
So
mean,
you
right
pull,
where-
the charging unit is sitting here and you pull up to it and then you
Yeah, you
stretch
take
the
it
cord out.
Stretch the cord, and plug it in.
Where are they located?
They've got
at
a
the West Erie
canopy and
Plaza?
they're just like
Where are they?
Mount
Okay.
Court.
All right.
But the ones that I've seen, that are full-blown in South Florida,
Yeah.
they look just like sheets, okay? Other than underneath the canopy, instead of having the fuel pump, they have the charging station.
Okay.
And you park it to it in a little
But,
different way. They have a
realistically,
configuration
it'll
of
be 20
it.
years before there's not a hybrid.
Excuse me?
It'll be 20 years before there's not a hybrid convenience store that has them both. You're gonna have both
You're gonna have both, that's
for a
the
long,
point,
long time.
Doug. You're gonna have both for a time. So the question is, where do you put them? And that was why I brought up all this stuff. I'm not trying to take all your time. It's an interesting question.
Okay.
See,
Today, in today's world, you don't see, even though he's talking about the future, which we won't see for a while in Erie County. But, there aren't any convenience stores developing that have 4 pumps or less. So I think we really have to look at having a pump out of large in the C2
and
along with car washes.
And the other point I'd like to make is that, you say it's a conditional use and it's got to go through, a conditional approval. Well, everything you do is a conditional approval. Are you kidding me? Everything you do is a conditional approval. I haven't built one development that wasn't a conditional approval and when it was zoned properly and everything. Come on, you got to go through the land development plan, you got to go through the engineering. Everything's a conditional use. Okay, everything's got to go through your engineer. Everything's got to go through planning and zoning. Everything's got to go through, everybody's got to sign off on it. So you have a conditional use built into your system, okay? So everything's a conditional use. My point is, and again, I refer back to these guys, if you're dealing with a national client that somebody just wants to come into Erie, okay? They want something they understand the land development plan process, okay? They get that. They get they got to go through an engineering process. They get they got to go through the stormwater management process. We get all that, okay? We get you got to go through BIU and have your plans dissected to the nail, okay? That's fine, we all understand that. But the minute they see, well, the zoning is, you gotta go through a conditional use, they're gonna say, well, why am I gonna waste my time here? I'm gonna go somewhere else. And you don't have any other places to go in Mill Creek Township because you basically zoned everything in the MU condition. That was my only point.
Okay, thank you.
One more question. Your shopping center definition shows like 3 units or more, the smallest one. Is it 2 unit, considered a retail building? 2 unit building?
Because you
I don't see anything
you had a building that had 2 uses in it.
Oh, yeah. In the commercial corridors, a building is permitted to have more than one use. So, yes. Yes, yeah, any of the mixed-use districts or the commercial districts permit more than one use.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, that is the last item, I believe, on our agenda for this evening. Am I correct? All right, then I guess I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Didn't think so. We stand adjourned at 6:37.